As you may have already noticed from the title, this is not a regular episode of the Important Cinema Club podcast, but it is in fact a feature-length commentary track for the film Beyond Skyline. If you haven't seen the picture, it is a blast of pure entertainment. It stars Frank Grillo, is an alien invasion story, which then turns into a martial arts action film with the actors from The Raid, and then finishes up with a little bit of kaiju fighting. The way that this commentary track came about is that the sequel to Beyond Skyline, titled Skylines, was just released in December. And I was really excited for the Blu-ray. And I remembered that Beyond Skyline didn't have any special features on the disc that was released. And that was really surprising because its writer-director, Liam O'Donnell, is very active on Twitter and Facebook. So I reached out to him and asked, hey man, would you be open to do a feature-length commentary track for your film Beyond Skyline? And would you be willing to let me post it on the Important Cinema Club podcast? And he responded with, yes, that would be great. So, what you're about to hear, and I'll count you down, don't worry about it, is something that should be synced up directly with Beyond Skyline. If you haven't seen the movie, you may be asking, well, do I need to see the first Skyline? As we talk about in the commentary, no, you don't. You can jump right into Beyond, but you should watch the movie before you listen to this. What you'll want to do is get your DVD or your Blu-ray or load it up on a streaming platform. And, okay, you ready? So start both of these in sync in 3, 2, 1, play. Hello, my name is Justin Leclue, and I'm the co-host of the Important Cinema Club podcast, and I'm very happy to be joined today by the writer and director of Beyond Skyline, Liam O'Donnell.
Thank you for having me. It's fun to watch this movie with you.
So I want to go all the way back to the beginning, Liam, and ask you, how did Beyond Skyline come about?
Well, it's usually, we're in post on Skyline and the people that Relativity and some of the other financiers, I think through CAA and stuff, people were excited about it, and they said, what would a sequel be? So the co-writer of Skyline, Joshua Cortez, and I think we went up on the rooftop in Santa Monica, and we just started thinking of a bunch of different ideas, and then we pitched Greg and Colin, and they were really excited. It was still pretty much this movie, but Jared and Elaine were more central characters to it, but we still started with what you have here with Mark and Trent, and then linked them up. And the ship ended up crashing in New York, which is where the characters were from in the first movie. And it had kind of a big urban battle and stuff. A big tanker battle was the end of it. If you think back to 2010, we've seen a lot of urban battles.
Yeah, because I think like Battle Los Angeles came out, that alien invasion movie.
Well, that was the one that was like this whole controversy between us. But I mean, like even like the Transformers and Pacific Rim. So then when that version of the movie died after Skyline came out, and people weren't as excited about making a second one, it kind of went into like we had about 2 years of cooling off, and then but it would always be like we'd be meeting on other things, trying to get other things going, and some people would say, when are you going to do another, or what's the idea for another one? And so it wasn't until it came off of Netflix. We were one of the early Netflix movies for Skyline that it started playing on TV again. And when I watched it, I was like, I still love the aliens in this. I'd kill to make a sequel. I think we just have to like stop kind of trying to get other people to finance this and just write it and try to push ahead on our own, and then see if we can get partners to come in and help us. And that's kind of what ended up happening.
So you were like the main creative force on getting Beyond Skyline made?
I'd say creative, yes. The actual, like the muscle of and monetary would definitely be the producers, Matthew Chouse, who produced Beyond and Skylines, and then Greg and Colin Strauss, who, Beyond Skyline is very much a hydraulics movie, so it's shot on hydraulics cameras, hydraulics lenses, and they did, 90-something% of the visual
And
effects.
I'm curious to know when the structure of the movie came about, because it is, it's 2 halves. It's also like 3 parts, because this first section in the city, you assume it'll be the story of all these characters, and then you dispatch of them very quickly once it gets to the spaceship.
I think that was it's kind of early on that I was like I wanted to do 3 movies in one, and which is an insane thing to think of, but I think it was because the first movie was so contained and so frustrating from even editing it was like, man, it would be nice if we were had people walking somewhere. Can we just go to a wide of people walking? So that, I think that was kind of like the subconscious reason of why I wanted to make something so propulsive. And I think how that evolved was interesting too. It was this idea of doing the whole first movie from a different perspective and kind of rushing through it was definitely inspired by Lost. They had that really great episode where it did the whole first season from another survivor's perspective in one episode. And so it was like the greatest hits of the first season in one episode. So that to me was like this idea for the beginning. Like, okay, we're going to hit all the greatest hits of the first movie, but you're going to be down and in the shit.
And did you have to pitch it and it's like Roger Corman, we can recycle visual effects shots?
A little bit. We actually weren't going to early on, and then it was like, man, some of those old shots look really good.
Mm-hmm. They do.
So we were like, early on, you're kind of like, nah, we'll redo it, and then you look at it, you're like, oh, it still looks pretty good. We had so much more movie to do, so I didn't feel like I was, the aerial battles, arguably maybe the peak of the first movie. The end on the rooftop is pretty big too, but so the fact that we were just kind of doing it as like a throwaway first action sequence, I didn't feel quite as egregious.
I mean, it looks so good and feels so grand that when I saw it, I'm like, that has to have been part of the first one. I gotta go back and check it, because that would have been very odd to be tossed off in this first act. But, by the time this has come out, people have forgotten the first one and the specifics of it, so it's all new to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no one... that's why I do a recap, at the beginning of the third one. It's like, no one... I don't take for granted that anyone remembers anything in these movies.
Well, I say that, especially once you bring in characters from the first one played by different people, it's kind of like Phantasm-esque, because in the Phantasm movies, when they do recaps of the first movie, you see scenes with the new actors in the recaps, and it's slightly different, which is kind of like what happens here.
It's a little bit, yeah. That was kind of, wasn't originally in the script. I had that whole scene, which I guess we get to, but it was a mind meld scene, and so I had all this POV footage that they were kind of seeing each other's lives through POV, because I wanted to do him and the alien, were the communicating ones, and Elaine kind of died right when he got in there and had birth, and she died. They didn't talk, so you'll probably be able to spot the ADR now that I pointed out. That they kind of so it just the mind meld thing wasn't working, and so it was like, okay, well, we could bring in Elaine, the girl that played Elaine for us, and we'll have her just explain everything, and that would be a much easier way to kind of link everything up and just narrate what happened in the first movie from a human being's perspective and not an alien's.
And when you started writing the script, was the kind of father-son dynamic a baseline from the beginning, or is that something that you discovered as you were going through the scenarios that you wanted to play out?
Totally the baseline from the beginning. Honestly, I came up with the idea for Mark and Trent before Skyline came out, and there was actually talks, speaking of the whole Lost obsession, of filming a little cameo with Sawyer from Lost in the Mark character before the film came out, because we had a month time, and we actually met with him, Josh, and who was a super cool guy, And he was like, oh, he was down for it, but it was just impossible to actually make it happen in such a short window. But that was, we were like trying to Marvel Universe this thing from the beginning.
And did Frank Grillo come into the production early on? Did you have in the script like Frank Grillo type?
Well, I wrote it for Frank. I mean, but in 2013. So that whole earlier version was 2010. So then three years go by, and when I finally sat down to write the script, I just had loved Warrior and The Gray, and was like, this is the guy. I just felt like. He just so reminded me of like when my best friend's dad, who was a cop growing up, who would just be really, really, authentic and harsh, but kind of the person that I would want to be on a subway car with if the end of the world happened. And so it was a sort of like the whole thing to me was like John McClane in an alien invasion. And so I thought Frank was just perfect for that. So I wrote it for him. And the casting director, John McLary, came on, and he was like, I just pictured Frank Grillo. And I was like, yes, yes. Because whoever you pick as your casting, like whoever you go out to first and all that stuff, it's so important. It's not something people actually really talk about that much. I try to talk about it for indie filmmakers because I think it's like this kind of under-discussed part of the process. Because it's not like a studio where you've got money and you're going to get someone for the role no matter what. Like if I'd gone to someone else and they passed, like the movie might not happen. It just loses momentum, right? You only get so many passes from these lead actors when you're trying to make an indie movie like this. But so, the fact that I wrote it for Frank and the casting director like totally saw it, and we were able to get it to him, and that he responded to it. He was like, this is in my wheelhouse. I was like, you're goddamn right it is. And so that just made a huge difference. It kind of, I don't think the movie would have happened. I don't think I would be a film director if he hadn't said yes, to be honest.
And when you went around with the script in hand, did you like preface it with like, this film, you may read it and go, oh, I guess this one's all in a subway tunnel, like the same self-contained location? Or did you just give it to them and you're like, man, this is going to be wild, read it?
Yeah, well, it was funny because like most people would just only have notes on like the first act, because after that he was like probably didn't know what the hell was going on. It was it just felt like an action extravaganza with a lot of visual effects. He's like, I trust you for that. So most of Frank's notes were all in this stuff in the first act and trying to ground and figure out the character. But no, because it was a sequel, that also helps because, you could send people a trailer of the first one with all this alien glowy shit, and you kind of like, okay, I get it. It's another one of the things that we talked about before recording, where because it's a sequel, it's it can be there are really good benefits to that, because it's so easy to show someone like the proof of concept, like this is what a tanker alien is, this is what a drone alien is, this is what a siren light is. Yeah. Whereas on the page, this would just be like madness.
It's like a giant alien smashes into this. I should point out that it is clear you are shooting in Toronto, yes, Canada here, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, 100%. It was the only place. It was actually just looking at that as we're talking, in the stitching, and this is Toronto. But all the stuff on the actual tunnel where they get out of was all in where they get out of the car was all in. Well, actually, the truck was in LA, and then down there on the tunnel on the subway car was in San Pedro, California, and that is the Seinfeld subway car that we shot on, and we put into Warehouse 1, which Warehouse 1 has been in like every single show ever shot in LA. And in a lot of music videos, because it's this old warehouse on San Pedro down on the water, but it has this kind of weird subway tunnel vibe to it. And so we just built kind of a tunnel around that and stitched all this together. So here they're in a mall, actually a mall in downtown LA that leads up into this square. And so we go from Toronto, you turn the corner, you're in LA, and vice versa. But this was a lot of the stuff that where it was on the third movie, where I was like, we just had so many locations and stitches. And I felt like I was too literal a lot, where I'd be like, it has to be here and this has to connect to there. And I kind of realized like people just don't know.
Oh no, they don't. They have no idea. Like, it doesn't matter.
People just don't notice. But I think as a first timer, that authenticity was very important to me. And I like fought really hard for a lot of this stuff. And then even this is on location in downtown LA, but we had to reshoot, with not reshoot, but shoot elements of a bunch of hydraulics people for those backgrounds to fill out the crowds, because I didn't have enough people to get to populate into the area, or enough lights to really kind of show them. So it was just a lot of good learning experiences all around.
You had written or co-written the first Skyline. Was it tough to pitch yourself as a director? Had you made like shorts or commercials or music videos that you could show on a reel? Or were you just going out there and being like, please let me make this movie?
Sometimes it's better that you've never done anything, because people can just sort of like believe that you're going to be this, like, wow, he's a natural. But I didn't, because of, Greg and Colin Strauss, who directed the first one, produced this one. I've been working with them since 2005. And so I'd been writing and producing for them on all of their projects. I'd been on set every day of Alien vs. Predator 2, every day of Skyline, everything they'd done for when we started shooting this for almost 10 years. So for them, it wasn't, it wasn't really hard. They kind of knew that eventually I wanted to do it, and it made sense, that I was like, I'll write the script, but I really want to direct this one. And they I think they kind of thought that the ship had sailed and that it wasn't really going to happen. But I really went forward with it, and then their support, it wouldn't have happened without it.
They're like, let Liam chase the dragon. He'll never catch it.
Yeah, a little bit. I think a little bit. And then, but with Frank, it was like, when I remember on our first Skype, he was like asking me about the visual effects, and I was just like, I really don't give a shit about the visual effects, because Greg and Colin are producing this movie, and they've forgotten more about it than I'm ever going to learn. So like, we just don't have to worry about that. I was like, you and I, we just have to worry about making it as cool as possible, and making the performances good. And so that kind of was like what he wanted to hear, that I wasn't really geeking out about the aliens and all that shit, and that I really, wanted to do like a gritty, 80s, 90s kind of cop movie for him in this invasion. So, that kind of, that's at least what our initial conversations were that sparked his interest. And so it definitely, I know my reel was like, it was all stuff that I had, written, co-written or produced. It was not like anything that I could hang my hat on.
And I'm sure people, when they read the script for this, were like, how are you going to do this? This is very big.
Yes and no. And I think that's just, again, because of the first movie, that they're like, well, that one was really big.
Yeah, they shot that one in a condo. They can do anything.
And then Greg and Colin are so confident that about that they were like not worried about it. But my DP, Christopher Probst, who I'm sure we'll talk about a lot on this, he just kept being like, there's a lot of shit in that script. And I'd be like, what do you mean? It's going to be fine. He'd be like, it's a lot of shit. I read it again last night, man. It's a lot. And I'd be like,
You're like, don't worry. A lot of the aliens, they're in suits now. It'll be easier.
Yes. There's a lot. I just had a lot of naivete that helped. If I knew going in.
This is a beautiful first-time feature, because you can tell the person making it is throwing everything at the wall in the best way possible. Oh, I should point out, right before she disappears, though, but Betty Gabriel in this movie, I remember when she showed up, I was like, oh yeah, Get Out came out. That movie was great. I'm sure she'll have a big role in this.
Well, I cast her in the first movie of her career. She'll tell you that.
Really? Wow.
This shot in 2015. So this is before she was cast in Get Out and The Purge and everything else afterwards. So she had no roles. She had just been. I think she had gone to Juilliard, and my casting director was like, check out Betty, check out her audition. I think she's a star, and I was like, yeah, she's perfect. Great. Love her. And we met and
yep, her brain's going to be ripped out like 20 minutes in, but up until that point, she'll be great.
Yeah. You're like, every single role you try to make it as good as possible. But yeah. And then it was kind of crazy. Like while we're in this super long post period, she's all of a sudden becoming this like phenomenon, and her like her GIF is like, was like the GIF of 2016, 2017, with her, oh no. So that was really cool to see. And I remained a fan. And now it's like I definitely would love to work with her again. But we talked about, I came to her for a project for Portals actually, and she was like shooting, like a Apple Plus series with Chris Evans.
She's like, oh, I'm too famous now. I'm sorry, Liam.
But she was like, I definitely, never forget that you first movie role. So that's definitely a feather in my cap.
Beyond Skyline is a great like Charlize Theron, her Children of the Corn 3. She's in a lot. So it's like, oh yeah, I remember I started with Beyond Skyline.
Yeah, Betty, that's right. When she's at her Oscar, acceptance speech, I hope they do a career retrospective and we get to see the aliens rip her head out, rip her brain out.
That'd be amazing. Yeah. So like something like this is all practical and it seems so complicated. Did you ever have to scale back any elements from your script as far as especially like the destruction at the beginning here?
Yeah, there is a ton of scaling back all the time. But obviously the creature there's CG. We had a guy with a digital projector on his head. Sometimes I would do it because I didn't like the way people would move the projector. You kind of have to come in and like wiggle it in a cool way so that it'll catch the lens flare as he's going in to do it. But this one was fairly difficult CG fight. It is interesting to rewatch this again, just how full throttle it is all the time. And there was just so many audiences that you would watch it with that had like just couldn't find the groove of it because of that. And so it was so great to be at like Toronto After Dark when people are like geared for something that you're like, you don't want to wait around for. You just want it to be nonstop.
I mean, that's the thing that really caught my interest the first time that I saw Beyond Skyline, because I had preconceived notions of what I thought the sequel was going to be because I had seen the first movie. But then when it started with a scenario that it kind of made sense of how it would be an extension of what has come before, but then it gets crazier and crazier and you're running through things so quickly that I have no idea how you're going to get to the next point. That's when you really gripped me. A lot of these like DTV sequels, they seem to go through the numbers or they just recreate what had come before. And you succeeded in not only giving people what they expect, but then going beyond that. And like this brain rip here, it's like, whoa, 21 minutes in.
You watch that at like Trieste at like at the Opera House and like everyone's like in like really nice in their nice outfits and stuff. And they're like, interesting. Very interesting ideas. So, but no, that was actually a great audience too. But it is a fun movie.
And so you mentioned that the Brother Strauss, they dealt with the visual effects kind of part of the movie. How much involvement did you have when it came to like, oh, this is going to be practical, this is going to be CG, or did you leave that mostly to them?
No, I had pretty much, I was involved in every single aspect. It was just kind of like, once it went into the VFX and it was like going through the visual effects supervising process, which like in a traditional movie, like a studio movie, like the director like kind of meets with everybody and then the supervisor kind of micro directs everybody and then shows the director for approvals.
Mm-hmm. I just got to point out that is an amazing explosion right there. All practical too.
Yeah, no, that was in Toronto at that set. That set in there, that interior set that we were just in was Toronto, and now we're up in LA again, and they just blew it up on a parking lot near a Tim Hortons.
Because anybody watching, like, it's a VOD sequel to Skyline. Like, you don't expect right from the get-go like this much production value and scale.
And then, yeah, like so we had these shots that were really cool, but it was like, man, it would be great to kind of see those ultra wides that we had in the first movie. So we ended up just cutting them in and then Well, yeah, just keep them.
Yeah, put some trees in front of it. Whole new shot.
Things you were saying about scaling back. They were supposed to get into a car and have it be a whole chase scene here, and so that got nixed, and so then it was like I've lived in the Marina Del Rey for a while, so it was like I knew these were kind of these interesting, weird locations that aren't in movies that much, at these bike paths along the LA River. So I wanted to, if I couldn't do the car chase, I was like, all right, this could be a cool place for this. But yeah, it was supposed to be like a tanker smashing a truck.
I gotta be honest, I love the kind of immediacy of them just like running on foot. It's like so hopeless, kind of like the ending of the first one. And speaking of, having watched all three in quick succession, you really love to have characters make a last stand and then undercut it instantly. It happens a bunch of times in this movie.
Yeah, I definitely do.
Like characters are constantly like, "Here we go," and then they either get stabbed or killed instantly. Like,
it's so funny. Yeah, I think this one's definitely the most. I think this is the most just like pure id of me. This is like a 12-year-old version of myself. To the max. The day we were filming this, that actually Obama was in town, and so those big ospreys were coming off the water. So we had all the appropriate eye lines, but we couldn't make them do what we wanted them to do, so we still had to replace them.
That sucks.
With these CG choppers.
I mean, you can't have an end of the world movie without having a high overhead shot with CG choppers flying through.
So even that, like, that there was a tree there, and then there's not. Like, he was supposed to just crush this tree and have all that shit, all the debris go everywhere. And it's just one of those things where you're like, or we could not do it, and he just lands and there's no tree, and people don't notice,
I know it haunts you every time you see it, where you're like, if it just had this. But viewers like me, we didn't know what was it supposed to be.
Yeah, no, it was just a lot. Like, even the temple suplex at the end, he was supposed to suplex him into the temple and have the temple just completely get destroyed. I mean, of course, that's what I wanted to be. And they're just like, guy, it ain't happening. They're going off frame, and you're like, this is fucking bullshit. And then you have to like take a step back and be like, you're arguing over like fucking giant aliens suplexing into the temple. Just be grateful that you have a job. That's this crazy.
This is a scene too where you're like, is Frank Grillo gonna die? Like, is this film gonna completely kill off who they're setting up to be the main character of the picture?
Yeah, that was another one. Well, here you. Speaking of one-liners and then being undercut, the man Antonio Fargas.
Yep. Man, this poor character, he does it like 3 times in the movie.
It's just, it's an embarrassment of riches with him. It's like, again, like we have so many overqualified cast members in this movie that are just like, oh my God, like Huggy Bear is, he's actually producer Matthew Chow's stepfather. So, that was just slightly easier to get in the cast, but at the same time, it was like, how is like the perfect person to play Sarge, your stepdad? That's pretty cool. And but he still, we just had a nice exchange over the holiday break, and he still will send me texts and sign off as Sarge. I love it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Such a great guy.
So I have to ask, like, who's the person that said, all right, we're going to have, aliens throughout this film. Let's just put them in like Guyver style suits.
Oh, that was me. That was I thought even if we're, from the very beginning, if we're going to do a second one back then, that I wasn't as pleased with the end design in the first one. I know a lot of people love it, but to me, it was like too strange, and it was too like
right. It would have been impractical to see throughout a whole movie.
It was like shining skin, but it was also really bug-like and kind of like pathetic and creepy. And I think the first, like, pathetic and like that, like a little bit like Brundlefly, where you're like, just kill that thing.
Yeah, just put the shotgun in its mouth and blow it away.
And I think that was fit for the first movie better, that that it was such a horror kind of thriller creepy ending. But for this one where I'm like, okay, like, you know, they're kind of like supporting characters, and the sun's gonna get put into them. I wanted it to
kind
be
of gross, yeah. Well, I gotta say that like Skyline, when I saw it, all me and my friends were talking about when we left the theater were those end credits, which I knew that you fought for.
I did them, yeah. It was like I just felt like it wasn't done, and everyone's like, just let it go, but I just don't let things go. So we brought the actress in and took photos of her. And that ended up being kind of like, oh yeah, he's gonna fight this way off. But then that pisses some people off too. It's like some people are like, I can't believe they ran out of money and they just did this fucking graphic novel at the end credits. It's like, well, the movie was done, and I just did.
Yeah, you could have had nothing at the end.
Yeah, and I just was like, it just feels like it needs something more, and that could be cool. But I don't know. Who's to say?
So this set, it was like a big green screen set, right?
The one we were just in, the black pit?
Yeah, like the main chamber that they're walking around.
No, that was that one that he was just in, the black pit, was a big latex wall in Batam with sand on the ground and then a black tarp over the sand, and then we just put a bunch of slime all over it and a bunch of extras. And the interesting thing about the black pit scene that we're just in is that Frank we shot all of his side in Indonesia early on in the movie, and the actor that we had cast for Trent ended up getting cast in a TV show by the time we shot the other side, so we had to cast someone else, and they actually never, touch each other. That's like, it's stunt doubles on either side that neither actor are ever in the scene together. And kind of, again, like the type of stuff that like you just probably shouldn't do on your first movie, but learned a lot.
So, like, the design of this spaceship, was there a lot of discussion of what it looks like? Because it's complicated, but it's also not too complicated, if you know what I mean, where you kind of get, like, lost in it.
Yeah. So, like, here, like, this is a green screen set, and then you pull back in, and then this is back to the same black pit set that Frank was in, just redressed with a new, different pathway. And this was one we kind of added in that he was going to see the brain factory here afterwards, that we because just for runtime we wanted to condense these two sets together. They were kind of shown in different order, so we're like, okay, we need to show that these brains that they pulled out are going into the aliens before he meets Jared. So that's why we have this here, and then we have what we called the maternity ward, which is back to a practical set.
I love how much lore is just introduced, like, just rapid fire right here. I remember the first time I saw it, my jaw was agape. I'm like, I can't believe they're doing all this stuff. This feels like the climax of the movie, and we're only 30 minutes in.
That's what Sean Albertson said too. That was his his criticism, but also like, let's go with it.
Oh yeah, that is not criticism in my mind.
Yeah, he was like, your first act is a third act. That's the problem with this movie.
No, that's what makes it good. I mean, let's be honest. Your film is essentially 3 third acts stacked against each other.
Yeah. No, that's really exactly right.
And personally, that's what I react to when I see any kind of genre filmmaking, or filmmaking in general, which is someone that is passionate and wants to deliver to the audience as much as they can. Not the bare minimum, but going beyond expectations to really blow away people that watch it.
This is what we called our little Batman shot that was introducing Jared. And these things were the idea of these. So this is back to the same room, redressed. So the black pit that he was in at the beginning, that maternity ward, and then this is the last use of the set, which again was just a big rubber wall in Batam that, they kind of pitched me was going to look a lot cooler, to be honest with you, from a production side standpoint.
So when you got on set, were you like, uh-oh?
Yeah, I was not stoked. I was like, they had all this, they did like one panel and it had all this amazing detail like this egg. Like the whole wall looked like this egg did. Because that egg's pretty much in camera. And I was like, oh, sick. I've never seen this in a movie. The whole fucking, we're not just going to be another styrofoam movie. And then afterwards, I'm like grabbing all the styrofoam we can and putting it in as many scenes as we can.
You're like, get me some McDonald's, the styrofoam face. That's what James Cameron did.
You sculpt styrofoam and you put slime over it. It just always looks good. So I was
and you just kind of like lower the lights, have it reflected, and you're good to go.
So this stuff was, it was originally there was lights behind them during the black pit thing and it was coming through. But for the later sequences, I was like, just fucking spray paint it and put slime on the wall. I felt like it would be just better off not calling attention to it and looking more at the stuff that's in the frame and less background. So yeah, it was funny talking to the production designer on the third one, and they were like, so latex walls? And I was like, no, don't ever talk to me about that again. We're not doing those.
This must be the latex wall guy.
This set is the reason why the whole movie, kind of went over schedule and over budget, because this set was all supposed to be built practical, and it's all green screen.
Right, because you see in the bloopers, it's all green screen.
It's all green screen, and that was not the plan at all. And we ended up couldn't really make it safe. We had this great structure in Batam, Indonesia, but to make it all kind of safe with the Rock and Roll Trust was going to cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars to import it there and have it on time. And it ended up just being like, we're just going to punt this and we'll shoot it back in LA on green screen for the schedule. So, which was super cheap to shoot. But, to me, it was like, I like to think of, from like the filmmaking standpoint, I always try to think of like your meat and potatoes sets that you're going to reuse a bunch of times. And so because from a writing standpoint, I was intercutting to this set a lot and then doing the climax there. To me, it was the most like no brainer. That's the one you have to build. If these other little ones that you're walking through have to be green screen now and then, well, it's not going to be that many shots. It's fine. So it was like the exact opposite of the way that I wanted to do it in my approach, that we had to do it green. And I think it added like 500 shots to the movie and became really, really hard.
I mean, they look great if you didn't know it was a green screen.
Even some of them we had to farm some out because but this is all a practical set that was again sort of the latex idea. And Christopher Probst and I, when we came in, there was just nowhere near enough webbing. So I just remember the DP and I are sitting there putting all the webbing in ourselves, and people are like looking at us mouth agape like, what are you guys doing? It's like, this is just like indie filmmaking. I'm just where we come from. Chris will do anything on a set.
So when this happened, me and my friends, our mouths just like hit the floor because we thought this was going to be completely disconnected from the first one. But here you have characters from the first one interacting with the sequel characters.
This was the actress that, because we're filming in Indonesia, we went with someone who was locally from Singapore.
Right, because the first thing that we did when we saw this play out was go on IMDb and be like, wait, is that the same actor that was in the first Skyline, or is this somebody new? But that's fine. That happens with sequels. There's slight recasting because they're not going to last very long.
So then this is footage that we shot for the pitch trailer for Skyline back in 2009. And Tony was the original Jared for the pitch trailer. And we already had the shots done. So when I was mocking it up, I just used some of those. And then we're like, well, let's just bring Tony in. And luckily he hadn't aged in like 8 years. He looked great. So that was all for, that was for a reshoot. Where like I told you, where we needed to have that's my wife right there. The one that got the belly removed. And she was pregnant with my third born at the time. And my effects, supervisor Alan Holt went up to her and knocked on her belly and said, "Wow, that pregnant belly looks amazing." She's like, "Ow!" And he's like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." He thought it was a fake belly.
So was this something that was right there on the page that you were going to link the first movie this way, or were people like, "Can you link the first movie somehow?"
No, people were like, "Don't link the movie first somehow." I was the one that wanted to do it. I remember I did like a script consultation with Judith Weston, who's this kind of famous directing guru in LA, and she was like, "This movie, either it wants to be an original or it wants to be a sequel, and you just have to make up your mind. You can't do both." And I was like, "No."
you like knock the pages off the table. You're like, "I'm gonna do it my way."
I was just like, fair enough. I think it became more of its own movie through this process. And I think, once coming with Frank and him being like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be the lead. And that changed more of it to tailor it around him. That was still fairly early on, before we were shooting or anything. But yeah, to me, there was pressure like early on from people when they first came to us to talk about a sequel to just toss out this treatment and just go to Shanghai and do, Skyline Shanghai and the same basic beats of the first movie with just different characters. Like that would be the kind of the cynical version, I think. To just basically just, do it in a different city, not connected whatsoever, show the alien invasion from a different perspective. But it was super important to me to like kind of,
I gotta have guys in rubber suits punching each other.
But also redeem the first movie and connect it. And like, there's, the ending of it was my favorite part. And I wanted to use that to, it's where people would be like, dude, this feels like it's an origin to a comic book movie. And I'm like, it is. And so it was important to me, especially at the time. I think now I'm much more, kind of like know that I can never please anybody. But I also felt like there were so few fans of the first movie that I was like, I can't just completely abandon them. I have to answer this question because there's a big cliffhanger. And so to me, I felt like it was a dereliction of duty not to tie them together.
Every time that I tell somebody, you got to watch Beyond Skyline, they're like, do I have to watch the first one? And I'm like, well, you don't, but you should, because it does tie into it.
Yeah, you don't. And it's the same question people have been asking on Skylines. And it's like, you don't, but like, I don't think you get the full appreciation. Like, even if you don't like one of the movies, the fact that these 3 movies exist within this same bizarre trilogy, and I believe me, that was a joke to me in the marketing for part 3, but like in a series at least is just that's kind of what's amazing about it, is that where we started to where we go is part of the fun.
So you're writing your script and you enter the lines and then a baby becomes a character. Did you have any nervousness about that? Were you like, maybe there'll be a dog as well?
Absolutely insanity. I had no nervousness at all. I'm like totally confident that that's all going to work great.
You're like, I've seen American Sniper. There's a realistic baby in that. That's what we'll do, right? Because for people that haven't worked on a film before, the one thing that everybody tells you before you start making a picture is that do not do anything with babies or animals because they are the toughest things to control, especially a baby who's supposed to be very young and recently born. You need to bring like multiple babies on set because you can't put just one through the paces. And there's a lot of rules and complicated things that need to be followed to be able to just make it work and get the basic shots.
There's our styrofoam piece that we, where we have our little power quadra.
Okay.
And I was like, I took that styrofoam piece and I put it in like the background of every green screen scene after this because it looked, I was like, oh, it's in camera, it's practical. How nice. But this set, though, one more thing, this set, we reused like the general asset of this set like 3 times in Skylines. We just changed, like we took the tankers out, we inverted it, we did all this other stuff, and you'd never know.
The suit, like the practical considerations of it, did it go through many designs to make it something that like an actor can wear and walk around in?
It was a one thing prototype, like that was it.
And you're like, all right, go.
And it lasted 2 movies because we actually reused the suits for the other one. I mean, Alan Holt's a great practical effects creator, and it wouldn't have been possible without him. I mean, we went through a bunch of different designs, like in the computer designs, but not builds. I think the first couple designs were very Halo-esque, and I wanted to go more Predator aliens, and so that's kind of where they ended up.
Was there like one main suit performer on Beyond Skyline?
Yeah, it's on both movies. It's Jeremy Fitzgerald he's playing Jared here, and he plays Trent in Skylines, and he's just got a great physicality, and he's really he's also a stunt supervisor in his own right, so he could choreograph a lot of the alien fight scenes, even in Skylines, when he wasn't stunt supervising. He can input and be like, knows exactly what's going to look good with their moves. Because there's only like 4 punches that they can really do. It's these slashes and stuff like that. And that was one of the things on part 3 that I've talked to the guys from Berlin. They would be like, in some of the choreo, they'd be having them do like real moves. And I'm like, no. They can only kind of do these different slashes.
Watching it the first time, I actually did go like, how are they going to make these big, I mean, it's a bulky alien suit fight. And I got to say that you get some fun moves in there, as well as just them bonking each other on the head with their meat claws.
That's me, by the way. That's me looking at me in those 2 shots. I was Grillo and I was the shepherd at the ground, because that was a reshoot. There was a whole other fight scene right there with Frank and Jared taking on 2 other pilots, and it was like it was a really fun one too. But again, just too much shit in this movie. I ended up taking some of the footage of that fight, and because it was all on green with Frank, using it in this later fight where he's doing the tentacle and just replacing the in-camera suit with the CG tentacle monster. So that's kind of a little trick of many in this movie. The other is that, Frank Grillo has an incredibly symmetrical face, so you can just always flop his shots.
Whew, good thing I didn't give him an eye patch or anything like that. Then I'd be really screwed.
Any of those first-time screen direction rookie moves where you blew it, it was like, flop it. Yeah, he looks great.
You can. No one will notice. I mean, look at this set. Like, man, what a design that is, even though it's all computer generated.
I know. Well, that's the thing in part 3 where Trent has the scars. It was like, man, can't just flop them willy-nilly.
This whole upcoming sequence makes me just nauseous watching it. The fact that people had to be upside down for so long.
This was all like a techno crane on like a 16-foot tall green screen set for this. And I had no previs. So it was all storyboards on a wall in the hydraulics office. And like we established, I'd never really directed a movie before. So I was like just kind of crossing it off on the wall of these different beats. I really could not have made it without Christopher Probst, who's the DP, who just kind of is. I learned so much from him on this movie. He was definitely a mentor.
So was he, your creative partner that was telling you like, we can't do that, or you're going to need to figure out a different way to do this?
No, he's just very much more of a problem solver. He would be like, fuck it, okay, fine, but like, how do we do it?
Yeah,
and that kind of goes with everybody. It was just like we had a lot of problem solvers on this, because there's just so many problems. Like even these things here, those little hand inserts, I totally blew those on the day. That these leg shots, blew those on. That's me. All these little inserts are just me and some of my friends at Hydraulics afterwards, because. I found like this whole movie was like I just felt like I was rushing through everything, that like any like inserts were like almost impossible to get. But because we had such a long post for all this different CG waiting for it to get filled in, and Hydraulics has its own stage. It was just really kind of like a warehouse at the time that we owned our own cameras, we owned everything. So it'd be like, all right, well, let's schedule a day. And we had all the wardrobes. So we just go into that warehouse and be like, all right, I really think this leg POV thing here will help this scene. It's kind of Frank's POV in that. And then, we ended up getting it in. I
would love a count of how many brains gets ripped out in this movie, because it has to be a record as far as brain ripping in films go.
But I rewatched like Starship Troopers lately, and it was like, oh my God, I can't believe how, as much as I'd loved the movie and watched it like so many times, I hadn't seen it in a few years. And it was like, I can't believe there's nothing been at the scale of that movie and that's that violent.
That movie is wild. Or even like speaking on a level of violence too, like those guys that get burnt up in that film in a big blockbuster. It's like, oh God.
Like it's $100 million. It's all, and it's like, it's cutting edge practical gore with cutting edge CG gore. It's just amazing. There'll never be anything like it again.
I mean, that feels like a movie that the producers woke up the day of the premiere and they're like, oh, what, a movie got made? Hell yeah, whatever, let's go see what we did.
It can only come out at the end of a string of like 4 amazing hits. That's kind of like how those things come to be. It's beautiful.
So, like I said a bunch of times during this commentary, like, this feels like the end of the movie. Like, I feel like viewers check and they're like,
fair enough.
Wait, there's still an hour left? And I say that in the best way possible, only because you cannot imagine what will be beyond this. Now, I knew because I remember when the movie was announced, some clips were released of the scenes in Indonesia, unless I'm mistaken. I remember seeing it at like twitchfilm.net or something like that.
That was the opening of the movie. It was, that was an alt opening, was to just intro on them and then see the ship crashing and then do the whole 24 hours earlier, which was similar to the first movie, so that made sense structurally. And I'd had that in the script at one point. It had gone back and forth. So I kind of filmed it both ways. And I think it's interesting. It's one of those pros and cons, because like having Iko stab a guy in the neck at the beginning of the movie definitely would have probably made it feel more cohesive in a way. But then you wouldn't have the whole Rose thing, which becomes part 3. So, I'm glad with where it ended up. But yeah, there is online, you can see the extended version of the opening.
Because I could have sworn it was like a longer take or something like that, but maybe I'm just imagining
it's
things.
Them. It's like it comes down from the trees and you just see a drone kind of going through, and you see them both hiding and scavenging and grabbing stuff, and then they're like, they have a couple lines of dialogue, and then the ship crashes overhead, which brings us over here. So yeah, that's still online somewhere, and it has a slightly different color grade. So for posterity's sake, interesting.
How did the whole Indonesia angle get into the screenplay?
Well, it was China originally, like I think it was like a Shanghai, like I was talking about, but that was just like the first draft. It wasn't, that was like 2013. It was even then I felt like, well, it just crashing down into another city once you start doing the research of it. It just felt like going back to LA in a weird way. And so I was trying to think of some.
Oh, that's a great next stab there. Just practical blood shooting.
Yeah, that was one of those little, tubes going up the side of his neck, and just a little bladder squirting that all out, and then, little digital cleanup. It's so weird when I watch this again that like anyone doesn't like this movie to me.
Oh, that's great.
Like, I just don't understand. I'm like, wow, this movie is so it's cut so fast.
I mean, if someone doesn't like it, you can just smile and go, okay, we just don't like the same things. That's okay.
No, I know, and I'm getting there. I'm getting there in my older age. This is probably the cheapest set in the whole movie. This is literally like a bunch of fucking Office Max, like storage things on either side of this set. This was done in LA on like the end of the schedule. And it's like literally like car cables and fucking like the bare minimum liquid latex stretched on stuff. But it is as cheap as a set could possibly get. But thankfully, it's an emotional scene. You're just in these tights and you're not thinking about it.
I always wonder, like, the actors, if they're like, what is going on here when we're shooting this stuff? Or they're just like, I have my face in the director who's never made a feature film before.
At that point, they'd already done the whole Indonesia. We shot Indonesia first. So they were just like, yeah. Well, let's just finish this movie.
It's coming out this year, right? 2015. You're like, yeah.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah. Let's see you at Sundance. I forget what I was saying besides that. Yeah, it is just cut so unrelenting. Sean Albertson did the last edit of this, and he is really, really good at just kind of keeping the pedal to the metal the whole time. Oh, you asked how did it come to Indonesia? That was so. It was just kind of like trying to think visually, because that's not where I writing to then being like, okay, but I'm actually visually I want like the third act to look different and feel different, and my wife was born in Laos, and there's, that's kind of just something in my life, obviously. And it was just sort of an idea of like, what if they crashed in Laos? So if we're going over to Asia, what if it's just a place that is just not in movies a lot? And then doing the research on that and looking into tunnel warfare and stuff like that, it just started to make too much sense. So then from the script standpoint, I think that was the second draft for like 2014, early 2014 was to do that way. And it felt much cooler, and it felt like, okay, now they're landing in Apocalypse Now. This is pretty fucking awesome. So everyone liked that a lot more. And then, and it also, but the challenge of going to shoot it, the producers had met Mike Willon from Infinite Studios, who has the studio in Batam, Indonesia, and one in Singapore. And so we were like, okay, let's go scout. And they sent us a bunch of stuff, and it had all the different locations that I had based it on in Laos. They had comparable things in Indonesia. And then, of course, Prambanan Temple, which is, a world UNESCO site, just this amazing location. So I was like, okay, yeah, let's go. Let's scout. And the first dinner that we had over there, they were like, have you thought about Iko and Yayan in this? And I was like, what? Like, you guys know them? They're like, yeah, it's a small town over here. Like, so that kind of blew my mind. And then we set about, like, we needed that to happen and got them in the movie. And then that changed everything.
And how did you go about choreographing the action for Iko? Did he have his own team, or did he collaborate with the LA guys?
No, the Wise team are, that at the time they were kind of transitioning from the Marantau team to becoming the Wise team. So they were ending their time at Marantau and kind of building their own company. And so they were just incredible. They just would send me, quick times of this carnage. And I remember showing it to Alan Holt as he was building the suits. The suits aren't even done yet. And I'm like, do you think they're going to be okay with this? And he was like, what the fuck? Because that wasn't in the script. And, we got like a month to go. And it was like, his jaw dropped. And it was like, how do we actually make this happen?
You finally let him die after so much time.
It's nice knowing you. He was supposed to be able to speak, the Lao or Vietnamese because he was the Vietnam vet. And we actually filmed it, but it just felt too much. So it ended up just being a nice moment of humanity rather than paying off the Vietnam vet thing as such a screenwritery thing rather than just let the moment be more authentic. I love this shot. This is one of my favorites.
As a genre fan, I've heard you say that like you love doing action stuff. So you must have come to this project like riled up with a lot of ideas.
Yeah, and again, it was almost like in my head, I was just like, it's gonna be like being in an action movie, and I still try to treat it that way, so that like it's not a chore, Like I think this shit it's the best job in the world. It's a lot of fun, so you should treat it that way. But with these guys, what's interesting. Having worked on a couple of different movies and different things, is that I think the Wise team, like, they were starting out and they'd always work with Gareth, and then Gareth and them would go and they would do the previs together for like months on the Raid movies. But they got hired like a month to go on this movie, and I'd never done martial arts before. And it was like they just kind of would show me the action in like one wide shot. It didn't really have camera moves or like inserts or anything like that. So that was sort of me being like trying to figure this out as I was going. None of the action was like kind of prevised in the typical way that they are, like on the third one or some of the other movies on, where it's like, here's an insert, here's kind of, this is the general idea of what the scene could be. Now you do your version of it. So in a way, I think that's what's kind of interesting about the movie, is that it's just not a previs movie. And then, a lot of the times the previs from both the CG standpoint and the other thing is kind of make things feel smoother and slicker, whereas this one just feels a little grittier and messier, but in kind of an endearing way to me.
I mean, I was surprised to hear you say, I think you did like a mini commentary on some deleted scenes online, and you go like, I decided to just add an action scene here because I was having so much fun doing it. And I was like, he could do that?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, I'm sure it was tested a lot of people's patience, but it was like, within the schedule, I wonder what. Yeah, as far as with Eco, adding action scenes, but my producers, everyone was so fired up that Eco signed on to the movie that there was like, if I'm going to them, I'm like the next stab action scene that we saw earlier was added a day before because I was like, hey, we're gonna meet you there. Like, we have all these guys, they're killing an alien. Like, why don't you kill somebody? And they're like, oh yeah, man, very cool, sir. And so they added it in, and I even remember like Frank wasn't there yet because it was after the holiday break, and he came back, and I was like, yeah, we just added another action scene yesterday. He's like, you had an action scene for Eco? Oh, I want you to add an action scene for me, and I. But yeah, like the fight between Frank and Eco's character wasn't there until we cast Eco. It was just a standoff. And then, then the other bad guys showed up, and it was like, all right, let's get out of here. And so some of those things are some of the lessons I learned because I got a lot of fucking pressure in post from when we would do screenings to like cut some of the fight scenes. Like they wanted to cut the next stab scene. They wanted to cut the Frank and Eco fight.
You don't listen to them. You're like, no, what are you talking about?
No, I was like, what are you I was like, you guys don't know what we're here for. But I do think the reason why people are making those notes is because they could feel that they were just sort of added and that they weren't really part of the story. So, I understood, but it was just a lesson, for the next time to try to make the fights kind of be a little bit more character driven, a little bit more, organic. But I think, again, it was just like someone, it was like Brewster's Millions. Someone just dropping the money off.
And you're like, you got to spend it. You got to do it all.
But the money is literally Eco and Yayan. Like, they're just like, they just showed up. You got to use them. You're like,
You can't do a Star Wars episode 7 where they just show up and do nothing.
No, I mean.
Let's not get started about that.
I'm choking on that because I know they were real. I mean, it's just, it was insane because I remember seeing the first time we did a rehearsal with Eco and Yayan in a gym in Indonesia. It was before Frank arrived. And so Yayan was playing Frank for the fight. And they did the whole fight like full speed. And I was like, I can't believe Eco's not in Star Wars. Like, why, they had Darth Maul and, what are you going to have, like a bunch of British actors swinging their swords around? Like, come on, why, you're not going to have this guy, be some type of badass, like Sith Lord or something? Like, give him 2 dagger lightsabers? Like, this feels like it writes itself. And I didn't know that they were actually in it at that point because they had hidden it from everybody so well. And so the casting announcement came during filming that they were in Force Awakens. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ.
You're like, I can't wait to see what they pull off on screen.
Yeah, I guess they knew what they do. And they were there for a few weeks. They filmed,
For a few weeks?
They filmed an actual fight in that scene. There's a bigger fight that exists somewhere.
They did?
With the alien. Like, it was definitely... They weren't cast just for what happened. There was because
they just stand there. And I remember like sitting in the theater and being like, that's it?
Well, you can see them in the background, like the tentacles grabbing them. There was a bigger scene. So I didn't have that pressure though, as far as like, because again, we were doing this, well before that movie came out.
So before Eco got cast in the movie, did his character get into these like hand-to-hand fight scenes?
It was just more of like a typical war type scenes, like, yeah, you'll fight, you'll shoot.
Okay.
Like I said, it was more Apocalypse Now was the vibe than to adding in the martial arts aspect. So you can still kind of squint and see what that movie would have been like. It's cool, but it's not as cool.
So at what point did the baby start growing throughout the script? Because I remember when it started to happen, I'm like, everything's on the table now.
Yes. My wife just watched this before we watched Skylines, in that scene where they come out of the water and she's like suddenly 18 months. She just burst out laughing right in my face. So supportive, honey. Thank you. I was like, it was hard because we shot that thing in the water first, and then, months are going by. We're shooting different pieces. I think it was in the script. So originally, Elaine's had a bigger part in the movie, to be honest. In the first draft, like 2013 draft, I think Jared might have still sacrificed himself, or he definitely passed away at some point in that draft. But her belly was growing, was the ticking clock. Got to get this woman off the ship before she gives birth. So that was sort of that role. And then once Frank came on, it was like, hey, let's make this more about Frank and less of a two-hander. And so tailored it more around him. So it's like, okay, well, Elaine can pass away, and then he's got this baby, and that's kind of this cool lone wolf and cub sort of thing. And then it was like, well, I just don't want to have this baby the whole time. And that doesn't, and like you saying, babies are really hard. And it felt like it needed some sort of sci-fi thing to it. And I think I just bit off more than I could chew because of the schedule and actually trying to get all these different babies. But luckily we ended up with this great child actress, Alana, who, again, it's just so unlikely that a third movie got made off of this, and then they go to space, and it's based off of that little baby, and all those little strange decisions that I just made launched a third space saga chapter. So, it was again, there's just so much of this being like, fuck it. Well, it's going to be great. Let's just do it and be legends.
So I'm guessing that, like you mentioned, the child actor wasn't too much of a problem, because even that is its own whole set of issues, because she's pretty young in the movie.
She was great, and she was actually just supposed to be cast for the... I think she was supposed to be into the scenes that she's up in. That was supposed to be her last scene, and she was supposed to grow one more time. And very
into an adult, and you're like, oh, we have an older person now.
No, we cast an older girl, and she was on set. She was like 5, and very, very wisely, Boyana was like, "This girl's got something, Liam. You should stop." She's like, she's really, really good, and they had a good rapport, and they did. It was the moment where she grabbed her face at the riverbank. And they looked at each other. She was just like, "You can't replace her. She's Rose for the rest of the movie." And I was like, "It's a great point." But then I did have to fire a 5-year-old, and there was a lot of tears, and upset stage mother. Understandably, but unfortunately, the movie was better off by not going that extra step, because you just started to just lose any connection to the character at all.
Yeah, and you would expect her to keep growing throughout the movie too. Even if it went from the 5-year-old, you're like, all right, what's the next stage? Is she going to be like an old lady by the end? Or?
That's why the ending is what it is, because the original version of the movie didn't have Lindsay Morgan in it. And we screened it, and everyone's like, so does this kid just die tomorrow? Like, what's happening? And I was like, touche. Okay, good point. Let's figure that out. So the last thing that we shot is the wraparounds with Rose in the future.
I think it's wild that Lindsay Morgan continued to play the character.
It's so wild.
In the third one as well.
But think of it like this. What if the other girl that if I hadn't fired didn't look like Lindsay Morgan? This girl, Alana, did. So it's like, there's just like all these little weird micro decisions that accumulate into, who I think is having the perfect person play that role in the third movie. And it could have just gone sideways so many different ways. It's wild.
So as your first feature film, was there a lot of people trying to like push the direction the movie had to go, or they would have liked it to go? Because looking at the final product, it seems like it's pure you.
Yeah. Definitely more so than I'd say the third movie. But it's still, I guess they're both comparable. I mean, they're collaborations, right? It's like, you've all the actors, they see the things differently. And it was more just me. I felt like I was just like holding on for dear life. Like, like I didn't feel like I had the great skill set where I would see a scene like this and be like, okay, if I felt like something was wrong, like what I could really do to make it better. But luckily you have Frank, who's such a great actor and physical actor, and he has to make things right for him physically. And you have Christopher Probst, who's such a great camera blocker for where his camera is going to be. So they helped me a lot. But just that last scene with Frank, like my one note was like, we were too wide and you could see his arms. And there's something about being in a tank top with like being too wide that it felt like you were focusing on his physique. And it was like, Chris, just move in more. We need to just get tighter on him. And I think I even blew in on it.
I mean, I still got to say that I can't imagine you coming to this and directing your first feature film, something this big. I know you mentioned you were on set for other films that the brothers directed, like Alien vs. Predator 2, but having to show up on set in Indonesia and just shoot, especially a scene like this, people may not understand that there are so many lines of sight going on in this. And that means that you need to make sure that the characters are looking in the right direction to make the scene make sense. So you have here like Frank in the middle, two people in front of him, and then there's also people behind him. So you need to make sure that when you're shooting the scene, that when people are conversing, that they're not only looking in the right direction, but you have enough coverage to make sure that when you cut it together, specific lines, specific reactions, you can get the looks that you need. And something like that can oftentimes prove more difficult than shooting an action scene where the kind of momentum of how is it supposed to go is much more clearer than a simple conversation between like six people. But like you mentioned, Liam, you did have to flip some shots here or there because it's a mistake everybody makes.
Like here, this is like, I think this is the first scene in the whole movie that's like shot on a dolly. Like everything else is like all steady cam and, we had obviously a lot of the techno crane, but steady cam handheld. This was like, this lab stuff, and this was like the typical like real movie making that you do and everything else, like slow down and tell a story. The rest of the movie is so just like pushing you forward through all these different wild sets, barreling ahead. So yeah, I mean, it also because of our post going so long, I edited this movie like almost every different way.
Was there like a 90-minute version of or like an 80-minute version of the movie?
No, but there was a 3.5-hour version of it. And it was like, I'm just saying that like, I didn't feel like I had left anything on the table because it had gone so long and we'd tried so many things that I've walked away of this one like completely satisfied. And I felt like it was like making 3 movies, going through that process of like, there were different times where it would be like, pressure to completely do things really, really different. But yeah, I felt like the one thing on this was that the tone in the script, there was a little bit more levity like in Skylines. And it's just the nature of the beast of being like an alien invasion movie where like the world just ends, that like the levity just never felt quite right. So it ends up feeling at times a little more serious than my original intent, but it still kind of straddles the line. And if you're a good person who knows how to watch movies, you can enjoy it.
A good person.
That's literally where I've got to. I'm just like, you're a bad person if you can't enjoy these things. I just don't get it.
So I can't imagine you arriving fresh-faced, you're shooting your first feature film, and you said you shot Indonesia first?
Yeah, everything. The first thing we shot, the first 2 days, was Frank and Iko's fight.
Oh, man.
And of course, it's a 4-person fight because you also have Boyana and Pam's fight on the other side. And you have a baby, and then you have Yayan showing up with his badass aviators. And it was like, it rained like, 4 hours into the first day. We're in the middle of this rice paddy.
Do you remember the lessons that you learned? At what point did you throw away your complicated shot list? And you're like, we get whatever we can get.
Well, as soon as it rained, I had, so yeah, that standoff is like, hey, it's your first movie. And you have, Iko, Pam, Boyana, Frank, and a crying child at this crazy rice paddy in the middle of a jungle, and it's a standoff, and there's all these different angles, and so yeah, we were, I was overshooting like crazy. I had like 3 or 4 setups just to get him to the goddamn hut. And I'm just, I was just doing a bunch of like shooting. And it's working. It's getting well. And Frank's just like, we're barreling along. It's a weird scene because we're like doing this whole like, cop type thing that doesn't feel like it's in the rest of the movie, where he's just like, yeah, I know. I saw your tattoo or whatever. And so that was already just like feeling insecure. And then boom, it starts raining. And none of the things are going to match continuity wise. So I was like, all right, well, we'll shoot the rest of it tomorrow morning. Because usually it would be sunny in the morning and it would rain around lunch. And then it would kind of, be overcast in the afternoon. So I was like, let's just skip forward, turn the camera around, and you guys start fighting each other. Because they've been rehearsing it for the past week or whatever since Frank got there. So it was the thing that I was most comfortable with. It was the thing I'd shot the most in rehearsal with, different actors and stuff. So yeah, it took about 3 hours to throw out the shot list of what the day was planned, and then just turn around and have them start hitting each other. And I think it was, we did all the way up until like we did each part of the fight. There was like 3 layers of that fight, so we would do that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then when we got to the part where Frank just picked Eco up and launched him into the puddle, I just remember like shooting my arms up into the air and being like, this is fucking awesome. This is going to work. Yeah, this is the life. So, this is actually one of these scenes where it's like 5 minutes on set and all the actors are looking at you like you're crazy. And you're like, just trust me. We just got to cover a bunch of shit here. And like, they're doing these hokey lines and they're feeling it, but it was like a Friday before a weekend and everyone had a lot of fun with it. And it ended up cutting together really great. I like that was a Boyana suggestion of overcompensating for something. And I love the look on Frank's face where he's like, this is my movie. Don't fuck with me.
Well, I mean, I always get, a little bit worried when I see a scene where like a bunch of characters walk into, a room filled with guns. Because I'm like, are they going to use those guns? And this movie, it delivers.
Yes. I would never do that. To you.
So this big underground set, I'm assuming it's in a studio somewhere in Indonesia?
Yes, and that was one of the things. This is actually the side of the parking lot in Indonesia. This is our great insert unit. We had an insert unit that would just do the parking lot. And this is the only stuff that we shot exterior, like above in Batam. So it's a very different foliage than some of the stuff in Yogyakarta where the actual temples are. But so that interior set, it existed there from some other movie, like in a different form. It looked like it was kind of like a Saw type movie with some type of dungeon type set. But when we went to scout there, we saw it. It was like, oh, perfect. This'll, we could totally redress this. And the production team, I think it was the best set that they worked on in Indonesia. They really did a great job. Like all that texture in the walls, that wasn't there.
Oh, love it. All those scratches on the walls and stuff like that.
Yeah. They added all that, and they added all of this and all of that tech gack and we built all that around there, and yeah, it came out really, really nice.
So I'm guessing, considering that you said that you added like 500 shots of visual effects, that there was never like a limit that was put on you of how many visual effects shots that you could have in the movie.
Yeah, there was. It would just we just kept blowing by it. But yeah, I remember there was the edit, where I showed the brothers and they were just like, no. I think there was like 1,900 at that point, and we got down to like 14 at one point, and then once we did the extra cut after the test screening, it creeped back
You're
up.
like, I don't know how this happened. It just happened.
Well, it was a little bit like, okay, we're test screening, we're gonna add something else. I'm gonna fucking add a spaceship exploding at the end because why not? Like at that point, you'd seen the movie, you knew that this was a kitchen sink movie, and if you're gonna add a future, Terminator post-apocalyptic world, it has to pay off. So luckily, the Greg and Colin are pretty crazy as well. So it wasn't like, you're not twisting their arm completely, but they are running a business. So yeah, there was definitely that explosion was always funny. There's an early cut that the on-set editor in Indonesia did where he like went from her close-up exploding, and it was so funny. But it was one of those things where you're like, to save shot counts, like you don't do 3 shots of her explosion, you just do 1.
Oh, so it was just like a close-up of her face and then like an explosion?
Yeah, it was like close of her face exploding, and then it cut to like the side of it exploding, and then the rear of it exploding, and I loved it. But that's sort of the shot count thing that I feel like I learned on this one that I used more on Skylines, which is it's got I think 500 less shots, and a lot of that is just by kind of picking a little bit more beforehand and being like, we're only using this shot for here to here, and instead of it being like as cutty as this one can be at times.
I mean, it feels at times like just as many visual effects as you can throw at the screen, like because it's so organic within like the nature of what's happening. All the aliens are just so present.
No, it is. Trust me, going back and seeing this again for the first time in a year after being in post, I'm just like, wow, there are so many shots in this.
So this ending, as we're getting to it, and it is like a 25-minute, basically like from this point on, it's one long action scene. Did the Keiju element, like how did you land on that?
I mean, it landed on that like before anything else. Like I told you that, the end of the first movie, there's a shot where we reveal that there's a creature inside the monster. It wasn't something, I think it was something that was, discovered in post and we added it. So it's not like there's this huge reveal, but there's a shot of the pilot inside the tanker when, David Zayas is fighting it. So from the first treatment of what Beyond Skyline would be, it was a kaiju battle at the end. So it was always just about like, who was in the kaiju and how that was going to happen, where the only kind of changes in how long it was. I mean, there was definitely, my original version was a lot longer, and like I said, I really wanted him to suplex him right through the center temple. I don't think I'd be allowed back in Indonesia if I had done that, so I'm kind of glad with the way everything worked out.
Wait, you were going to destroy the actual temple, though.
No, but they actually were like, even in a thing like you can't destroy the temple digitally, and even though we kind of mess it up, and the alien does show up, and he just pulls the dick move of knocking a temple over onto people rather than just stomping them, which I thought would be a deal breaker, but it apparently I've gone back several times since and been welcomed in, so it couldn't have been too bad.
Okay, but you're still haunted that suplex doesn't exist in this movie.
I know. I kind of got over it because I do like the shot quite a bit. But there's a version that we did of like an early teaser that was really fast with the suplex. It was a little more Transformers that I think in hindsight would have been better than some of the we ended up going really slow with them, and then when we did the last cut, we're like, it's just too slow, and we sped them up. And so you'll notice there's kind of a like Ray Harryhausen like stop motion feel to some of those shots, and it's because the animation's being sped up. It's dropping frames and stuff because it was animated to be a certain speed, and we're kind of speeding it up just to give it a little bit more impact. So we kind of went a little too literal with like, big things should move slow.
Yeah, like the Godzilla, like shoot it in slow motion. Otherwise, it looks cheaper when they're moving fast.
I think because the Transformer movies existed in the interim, that it just like it just felt so much slower. And everyone's brain has been trained on what they've seen in the last 10 years.
Even though that when you watch those Transformer movies, sometimes it's like, I don't know what's going on.
Right? Yeah, it's just spinning, twisting. But
it looks complicated.
Yes, but I think that was it was an interesting challenge and experiment. This part was interesting, was that like this was a great
note from Sean Albertson when we're doing the last cut is that like I had this like intercutting back and forth between him and Frank a lot, like pinging back and forth. And I think that's sort of like a typical first timer thing, is that like there's like a little bit of like insecurity and you just want to keep pinging back and forth and intercut a lot. And he was like, you've got a great story, a great fight in here, stick with it. And I think, you know, that it definitely helps. It definitely made this more intense. Whereas if you're just like, okay, Iko goes through the wall, then we go to another thing.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I find that's a big mistake, like big budget action movies do, is intercutting fights, where you're like, no, just keep it on this. Especially this scene is so claustrophobic with the way stuff like this big monster in a small space.
It allows them to kind of not actually do fight scenes. It always annoys me, like in some really big budget movies where they do that intercutting and you realize you just watch like a punch block combo and then you're out again. So ours was nothing like that. I felt like I was trying to draw out the tension of Iko and those guys more, and I thought by intercutting it was going to draw the tension out more, but it actually lessened it because you had to keep reorientating yourself as to where you were.
It's weirdly something that a lot of big budget action films do, almost as if, I don't know if it's the director or the editor, they don't have confidence in the action scene itself and feel they need to play it against a bunch of stuff, which can work. Like, you know, Empire Strikes Back, the Star Wars films made it famous, but when you do it too quickly, it becomes desperate.
That's something we shot in the parking lot like a year later, where we just literally poured gasoline on one of the suits and burned it. And we put a pole in the back of the suit's head, and I'm animating its head as it's going, no! There's some of that on the Instagram. That was fun. That's like, again, greatest job in the world.
I was going to say that, speaking of going, no, there are so many like subtle sound effects, like especially like when brains gets taken away, it's like, did you have difficulty like finding the right balance for that kind of stuff?
Yes. The sound, you know, we worked quite a bit on it. I mean, we finished the movie sort of twice, and we have an amazing sound team on it. And the mixer, Chris David, who's, you know, done like Michael Mann movies and Predator movies and stuff. So it ended up having a really, really good team. This was another one of these. I actually had Frank jumping off the temple onto that scene. And it just, because the actual hovercraft, another one of those ambitious ideas, it was supposed to destroy everything beneath it. It was supposed to like have a scorched earth trail behind it. So when it's coming across the jungle, like the jungle would just be like this burned trail behind it. And so he had to jump from that temple over it. But that was one of those early things, like, you know, you're fucking insane. So he could just climb right up.
This ending doesn't prepare you for what's about to happen in like 10 minutes when they're all fighting the aliens one-on-one. Was that like just something you decided when you were writing the script? Because like in the first one, the aliens are undefeatable. Like, you can rip their brains out, they're just going to reform themselves. And here, they're defeatable.
I mean, the actual scene was like in the script like a half a page long. I'm not joking. He fell out of the ship, and he saw Audrey, and they all got cornered, and they were firing their guns. But it was like, you know, everyone's doing it, but there's no way it's gonna last forever. And then Trent came to the rescue. So again, it's those thing of like the Brewster's Millions of spending that Iko Yayan, you know, cachet instead of cash, it's cachet. And then just being like, well, you know, making this fight into this amazing thing. And even the scene of Frank where he falls to the ground and the alien comes for him, I wrote that out at lunch before we shot it, because I felt like it was missing the just dramatic beat to get the claw back on. Like I was like, oh wait, there's just gonna be a claw right here. So some of that stuff is just organically kept growing to be bigger and bigger. And then with those guys, it was like, yeah, there should have been a line somewhere. And I actually wrote this line into part 3, but it sounded strange. But it should have been a line somewhere where like, aim for the creases in their armor, and that's why
aim for the crease. That almost sounds like the suit.
Yeah, like that's why the knives work better than the guns, because it's like they're armor plated, and there's these little creases. It's again, all that stuff of like, you're going to shoot one movie and then you get this amazing gift from the movie gods, and then they're like adding these amazing scenes.
I mean, anyone that's listened to the podcast that I co-host, the Important Cinema Club, knows that I am a firm believer that pretty much any genre movie, science fiction, noir, romance, historical epic, could be improved by martial arts action. I know some people may disagree with me, but they are wrong. And if you are a filmmaker out there and you're not quite sure if you're nailing the kind of tone of your project, throw in some martial arts duels and you will be fine. Here's
our dick move that we described earlier, where he could just start stomping on people, but he's like, no, I'm gonna knock this over onto them.
These aliens, they're not nice nice people.
They don't respect ancient architecture. They've got no sense.
And I mean, like, this climax, the way that it plays out, you were saying that you had to spend that eco money, but you kind of extended that as well in the movie after the Skylines, where the climax is kind of structured in the same way, with these multiple fights playing out, and it's like different flavors of fights.
Yes.
So is that like a lesson you learned here?
For sure. And it was, I feel like everything about part 3 is just different lessons that learned in this one, and then trying to stretch the budget and do kind of full on world building. Although as I'm watching this one now, I'm like, yeah, I did a lot of world building in part 2 too.
You did do a lot of world
funny.
building.
We're going from location to backlot right there, as you can see. And so that was like on the actual location, they were like, you can't actually film anything here. But then as we started filming, they were telling us we couldn't film the action pretty much. They're like, you guys can have people running away, like those big nighttime scenes that everyone's running, but you can't do like fight scenes here. It's sacred ground. And we're like, okay. But then like as we're filming, they're like, oh, we see what you're doing. It's fine. You can film. So I wasn't quite like prepared to do the end fight fully there, because they told us that we couldn't. So you'll see when Frank kind of goes out there and we get to the end of them all joining up, that's like as far as they kind of wanted us to go. And then they let us film like rehearsals there, and we ended up using some of the rehearsal footage for some of the other fights. So this footage right here, this POV stuff, was all from the mind meld. So that aborted mind meld idea, ended up reusing that because it doesn't really make sense, because that's all from Frank's POV. So that was from Frank's mind meld, but we're using it in this context to be Trent's memories, but he's apparently having third person memories. But it just still it works, for the actual information, you get it. But that was the original
And
intent.
were there any people telling you like, you got to set this climax at nighttime? Because like when they get out, it looks like it's going to take place at nighttime, but bravo for having these monsters fight during the day.
No, it was the opposite, because of how hard it is to shoot it at night and light everything. It was more like, let's speed this up and get to the daytime. Yeah, no, the hydraulics is never afraid of doing the CG in the day.
And it looks great. People may not realize it like consciously, but you just nail the giant monster sequence, which for Hollywood making so many of them, like the Transformers movies are giant monster pictures, no one has figured out how to portray it on screen. There's always a fear that it will look dumb or fake, as opposed to following the masters in Japan who just know how to do it.
Look at that fucking piece of trash set thing that we grabbed. It was like fucking seawood with like a little bit of latex in there. But that little bit there, and then this stuff on the location, so you have a little backlot to location, but then this little bit here like was maybe the best feeling I had in the whole movie filming, because it was kind of very organic, coming together with the blocking and the camera moves and the choreo, and just a great collaboration between everyone on the day, that we were like, and this was our last thing that we shot in Indonesia, before breaking for the holidays shot. And it's just coming to that shot. Yeah, it was just like, it was just like such a great feeling like, oh, this is better than I ever imagined. But I do think part of that is like, the fact that how much I was a huge fan of all the actors, that I wanted to treat them like they were icons, even though, they might not be icons to everybody.
I love that shot because it's like, you guys are so excited. They're all together now, even though they've only existed in this one movie.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like kind of like, I don't know. It's a little bit like what I try to do. Is it just like, we're not. This isn't. You love those other things because they're IP. But this is like, hey, you should love these actors, and if you don't, you will after this. Hopefully.
I mean, so you have screened Beyond Skyline with audiences. What was the reaction where like this scene was playing out, and did it surprise you?
People loved it. It was always like an ace up my sleeve. It was way longer. I mean, I had the first note I got was that it turned into knife porn, and I was like, well, different strokes for different folks. What's the problem here? But I do feel like it ended up being a good length, but I had a much longer version that I felt, brought the house down. But I do think it's all the same beats. It was just basically like, 4 more kills probably. And then it was just kind of like designed to be this escalating thing. It was always a good feeling to watch with audiences because of the way it ended, that it just kept escalating.
I mean, when the Kaiju start fighting, which is something that, you never think is going to happen, the audience, they can't help but being like, oh, especially people coming from the original, which is so enclosed. And I mean, a bunch of big special effects are going around, but it takes place in one location.
Right. But it is just that back thing where people be like, oh, it's like Pacific Rim. I'm like, this tanker is in the first movie with the guy piloting it. It's like, anyone who made a sequel would have done a kaiju battle. I
gotta say, Pacific Rim takes place entirely at nighttime and in the rain, so...
No, but it was just one of those things where it was like, hey, we definitely rip things off from other movies, but you can't say the kaiju battle's ripped off. This was inherent to the property in 2010. That's all my point.
And I have to applaud you for the kaiju battle being something that makes sense. It's not just like one move there and one move there, and you have no idea what's going on. You pull the camera back and you let, it play out.
Oh, thank you. What we did? We actually filmed. So I had all these plates because in my head I had it, but again, no previs. So we're doing all these plates. Greg Strauss did some of the second. Oh, poor Yayan did some of the second unit plates. But then we didn't have really the choreo besides like storyboards. So we actually had a couple guys come into the warehouse and we filmed a full choreo and kind of with 2 guys doing that fight.
I'm like, Jan could keep fighting after his arm. Oh, no, that's not going to happen.
Looking at it now, I was like, wow, I can't believe we brought that guy back. I love it. Love it so much.
Yeah, you're like, oh, he's dead. He got his arms and legs ripped off, but nope, he's back in the third one.
So that little part there with that extra save of Iko was something that he was like heading out the door, and I was like, wait, I want to do one more scene, so it's on green screen, because it was like we didn't have time to go out and film exterior. He just shot one extra fight scene with him, and there was a whole other extra fight there, but I used at least the tag because I felt like Audrey needed one cool moment where she picked up a sword and killed an alien.
You're like, I just need one more fight. Just one more, please.
That's what people said about the last one, Skylines. They're like, why does everybody know how to fight in this movie? I was like, I got 2 rules. Everyone wears tank tops and everybody fights.
I mean, I gotta say, that Daniel Bernhardt fight in Skylines, chef's kiss. Love it so much.
He's great. He was like our action, MVP. But yeah, all this stuff was filmed. Guy De Silva, who was the Black Panther in Marvel's Civil War, in Captain America Civil War. He's a really good action actor, stunt and choreographer. He brought these 2 guys who I can't remember their names of, but they came into the warehouse and he choreographed this fight for the tanker battle that we ended up using as reference. And then even then I would like that end fight with the grab. I filmed a little extra reference. And
yeah, you can totally feel the choreography and the storytelling arc of the monsters fighting. They are not so removed from what's going on that it's just a bunch of noise in the background. And I know that I've been complimenting this fight scene for the entire running time, but man, I just think it works so well.
I really love this shot of the shepherd, we called it, but it's the harvester now dying. I thought that was one of the better VFX shots Hydraulics did. And then, okay, so can I explain the fist bump? Because Frank, it was his suggestion because, you know, in the script, it was like they embrace, and like that makes sense when you write it. And then when you see the suit, you're like, there's no way they're going to embrace.
He's like, I'm stabbed.
But there is a storyboard of them hugging, which I put on my Instagram, which is hilarious. It's hilarious. It was like, okay, that's a different way to do it. But then he was like, I'd just do something like this. And he puts up, you know, the fist and do the fist bump. And I was like, it's perfect. And when we did at the back lot, we shot his side on set in Indonesia. At the back lot, we shot Jeremy's side as Trent, and Frank was like, I don't know about the fist bump. Maybe I should just grab his hand. And I was like, nah, dude. we gotta lean in on the fist bump. You know, like
I mean, it's definitely the second best fist bump of all time. Because have you ever seen the movie Robot Jox?
Robot Jox?
Yeah, it ends with a fist bump at the end. That's like the last frame of the movie.
That was the one that Peter mentioned as that this is the heir to, and I was like, that's very fitting for Skylines and Robot Jox.
Yeah, I have to give yours second place because Robot Jox, the film ends with the fist bump. It's the last shot of the picture.
That's my daughter in that one little shot because we shot this last thing 2 years afterwards with Lindsay, and so to have a little girl that would be the same size as Alana, who is now 5, I happen to have a 3-year-old. So this little weird set was just steel deck put up in the warehouse in Hydraulics, and then here we are. This is all green screen.
And how did you cast Lindsay for this like wraparound part?
It was hard. I was just kind of racking my brain and going through IMDb and thinking I wanted someone that looked like Alana and felt like Frank.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like she was perfect. You know, she feels like she's got the Frank attitude and physicality, and she looked like Alana, the little girl. And I really liked her in 100, and I went to the casting director, and he was like, well, yeah, let's ask. And, you know, it was great because I had a finished movie to show her, even though I think we just showed her the trailer. She's like, I fucking love Frank Grillo. Of course I want to be in a Frank Grillo movie. She's a huge Frank Grillo fan, and they've still never met. So, you know,
wow.
Maybe part 4. There you go. And here we are with the bloopers.
So, okay, who was the person who went, let's add some bloops to the end of this movie?
It was me. I mean, I edited all the bloopers.
I love a Liam O'Donnell film over the guy falling
and he
over.
says fuck right there. This is just such a great fall. We never had as good of a fall. We never had as many. Well, we fixed the legs in Skylines with better stilts that have more support. And so we don't have as great bloopers with the actual physical comedy because people aren't falling over at the same rate.
I mean, I feel bad for the suit performer in these bloopers because the actors are constantly making fun of
well,
them.
yeah, except that, like, you know, Jeremy's got a great sense of humor, and he's like, I've been in the suits, and they're pretty, like, padding. It's a lot of padding. So he always says it's like, you know, as he's a stunt guy himself, so if he's falling over with padding, he's, like, happy as hell. There was Ego actually caught on fire right there. Had to get that off. But yeah.
Whoa.
But yeah, so that's that little green screen. That was a little pickup. And whenever everyone's in green screen, they just kind of can't help themselves. But yeah, we were putting the bloopers as something for like the Blu-ray, and they just ended up being so good. And every person I showed it to was just laugh so hard that I was like, this should just be the end on Maine. And luckily, you know, to me, it was like, it's like a mix between the Jackie Chan thing and there's a little bit of the Predator thing because we had so many actors that died. You know, like you said, that it was nice to see them again, you know. But it's funny.
I didn't even think of Predator, but yeah, that's a good point of reference.
No one thinks of Predator. No one remembers that the Predator, every actor literally turns to camera and chuckles.
Smiles and like gives a thumbs up over the end credits.
And no one writes, oh, you know, it was a classic movie until the end on Maine when I saw Carl Weathers grinning ear to ear. He sucked me out of the movie. Yeah. His character was dead. Why is he looking at why is he breaking the fourth wall?
I mean, if someone is saying that, like, I was with Beyond Skyline until the bloops, you're like, oh, okay.
I've seen it because
wow.
you know how it is where you make a movie and you're like, did that actually happen? And you just spend too much time checking Twitter and title searching it and seeing what people say. So I've seen every reaction, but I always am just dumbfounded. Look at this. Look how fast the credits are. This is what I'm talking about. This is a super fast credit roll. It's almost too fast.
Oh, they're zooming along. Well, I don't think that you're talking about something we talked about before we started recording the commentary track.
So the credits on Skylines are super slow. This movie is only 2 minutes shorter than Skylines, but the runtime is like a ridiculous 6-minute difference or something, and it will bother me for the rest of my life because this movie has about 6 minutes of credits and Skylines has about 10, and there's no reason for it. But this is a little fast now that I'm looking at it. I do get that was, but we should have sped our ones up in Skyline a little bit, get that runtime down. Because you do notice that people will be like, oh, it's almost 2 hours. And you're like, really? An hour and 42 minutes is almost 2 hours? I don't think so. They're just looking at the 153.
Yeah, once it gets to 153, as a film fan, I understand where it's like, it's almost 2 hours.
But it's really not, because the actual movie is an hour and 42. It drives me nuts. But anyway,
you should go on IMDb and like edit it yourself and be like hour 42.
It'd be like, I want to do a director's cut
where the credits go fast.
No, just the credits. Just got 3.5 minutes of air out of those credits. It was like, what is wrong with you? But yeah. But anyway, that was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for doing this commentary track. I was sad when I saw Beyond Skyline come out on Blu-ray and there were no special features on it.
I still feel like I do owe just a straight up commentary explaining everything. I feel like I should try to get Christopher Probst on with it because it would be like film school. He's such a fun, knowledgeable guy to hear talk about making movies, but I still can't believe this whole thing exists. It's crazy.
Not only does this exist, there is a sequel to this one that I feel like people listening to this have probably seen, but if you haven't, check out Skylines on iTunes.
Yes, and we're saying the Blu-ray should be out next week. I recorded a commentary during the pandemic by myself, and it really fluctuates. A 20 minutes of caffeinated version to 20 minutes of drunk version, depending on what time of the day I was able to find some time to record. So you might hear a little slur, and then all of a sudden it's like cuts, and I'm like, so what we did today, and I'm all focused again. And I just didn't even bother to go back and listen to it at the end. I was like, I've already spent way too much time on this. It has to just go, and hopefully it doesn't blow up in my face afterwards. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun talking.
So, can you drop some hints, though, of like Skylines 4? What is it going to have when it finally gets here?
I'm working on it now, but it is one of those, I do feel like this weird, like, man, it's just like you're right down at the bottom of the mountain and you got to push the boulder back up again.
And it's not any easier, even though you've done it 3 times at this point.
No, and strangely, like, the treatment for this one, like, is... it's like it's a little bit more vague in parts in my head than normal, but like I just started the script because I could totally see the opening. So I'm like 25 pages in, but like, and I know where it's all going to go, but kind of different than some of my different processes. But I'm trying to not overthink it and just kind of like, take whatever inspiration you can get sometimes, because you know how that goes. It's like if the treatment's going hard, maybe I'll go this, then I'll go back to the treatment. Sometimes I jump back and forth, but it's definitely, the whole point of 4 would be to deliver on the promise of the end of 3 and to have these, the Frank's Mark Corley character,
the search for Frank,
reunited with Rose and Trent.
Well, I am looking forward to it, and thank you again so much for taking the time to do this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin.